So we're starting a new series today. It's called 33 Degrees, and this is going to be a little different for us, a little different than what we normally do here at Mosaic. We're going to have an internally focused conversation for 4 weeks, internally focused, and that's not something we do very often. So I want to be clear. I want to be kind of upfront with you. I'm not directly talking to everybody in the room today or for the next couple of weeks. Now, here's how you can know if I'm talking to you, okay? If you were out in your life having a conversation and somehow church came up, and if you would say the sentence, oh, yeah, I go to Mosaic. If you would say that, I'm talking to you today. I'm talking to you. So you claim this church, I'm talking to you. If not, if this is like your first time here, second time here, you're kind of checking things out, maybe it's first time back in a long while, and that's not you, hey, no worries. I don't want you to feel any kind of pressure, any kind of weird about what we're talking about today. It's kind of an internal conversation, but here's the cool part for you. I know when you come into a church, you kind of have a decision to make, right? How are these people weird? We're a little weird. Are they going to pass me Kool-Aid? Wouldn't you like to know? You're kind of making some decisions right now. So the nice part is you get a full picture of like where we've been and where we're going right now. So this will help you make the decision a little bit faster. But for the most part, if you claim this church, if you would say the sentence, I go to Mosaic, we're having a family conversation here. All right, so let's jump in. Coldest day this past winter was -10. I'm sorry to bring up depressing things right off the bat. Wind chill was -25 that day, and the worst part about it was the kids didn't go to school, and they were up in my face all day. The hottest day last year was in July. It was 94 degrees. With humidity, it was 102. Now, I don't think anybody's a fan of the extremes, right? But we always argue over, well, which one's worse? And I know there's some people that think that the hot temperature is worse than the cold temperature. And in my humble but right opinion, You're wrong about that. The cold is worse. And here's how I judge that. If you have to walk down your driveway to get your mail, which one's worse? 104 or what did I say, 25? -25? Don't tell me 104. Get out of my face. What's the worst that can happen at 104? You're going to have some sweat rolling down your back a little bit. If your driveway is long enough and -25, you could lose a finger, okay? So don't come at me with all that. And I know the argument is always like, well, you can put more clothes on, but you can't take more clothes off. Yeah, you can. You're just not brave enough. So, I don't know. Don't make me start a dress code here at Mosaic now that I've said that. But cold is definitely worse. Now, if you just take those temperatures, -10 and 94, we experience here locally 104 degree span of temperature. Isn't that crazy? We experience the full gamut there of temperatures. Now, you could split those into two. There's kind of two categories that are important. From -10 to 32, you've got one thing, and then from 33 to 94, you've got a different thing, right? -10 to 32, snow and ice. 33 to 94, rain and puddles. And you have one specific point, that's that transformation point between 32 and 33 degrees. Everything changes, right? You go from ice to water, from snow to rain, from depression to happiness, right? That's the big transition. And that tipping point, that point is so important. It's the state change for water, right? When we go from solid to liquid, the molecular structure shifts. The hexagonal crystalline lattice work made up of those hydrogen bonds begins to break down at a very specific point when just enough heat is introduced. And it's bigger than just solid to liquid. It's bigger than just ice skating to swimming. It's a life-giving transformation. Right? Because some things can survive in ice, a little bit. There's some viruses and some mold or something that can survive in ice, but almost nothing thrives. But man, when you go from a glacier to a bubbling brook, man, that is almost like a death to life transformation. That 1 degree difference changes everything. And it's a very specific one, right? It's not 19 to 20. It's not 55 to 56. Nothing happens significant at any of those points. It's just that one point. That one point. That changes everything. Now hold that thought. In Matthew 24, Jesus makes some predictions about what's going to happen as time passes. He's doing some future telling, and this is Jesus. So he's looking into the future, and he's telling his disciples some stuff that's going to happen in the world as time goes on. And he says a lot of stuff. It's interesting, a little scary, but there's one verse that I really want to point out. It's in Matthew 24, verse 12. Jesus says this: sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold. The love of many will grow cold. So he's describing a future state of the world, and he's talking about the spiritual temperature of things, and he says this, hey, it's going to get cold. Sin's going to be rampant, and love is going to grow cold. There's going to be a spiritual global cooling happening. It's going to get cold out there. And I just want to ask you, from your observation as you look around the world, what do you think? Jesus right? I think just looking around, you can kind of tell, like, wow, okay, I think Jesus has a point here, that our country right now is it's getting cold out there. That our state, even our city, is being hit by a spiritual glacier, a chunk of ice scraping and freezing everything. The spiritual temperature in our culture is dropping, and I would say it's below 32 degrees now. It's frozen out there. And if you don't agree with just like looking around, which I think it's pretty easy, just look around and be like, yeah, it's pretty cold spiritually. Let me give you some spiritual statistics. Many church experts believe that in 25 years, we will have lost 100,000 churches in our country. 100,000 churches are going to close their doors by 2050. That's 5,000 churches closing every single year. And there's always been churches closing, but the scary part is how high that number is compared to how low the number is of new churches to replace them. Church plants are about 3,000 to 2,500 a year, and churches closing are at about 5,000 a year. And now you don't have to be very good at math to see where that's going, right? If they're closing at double the rate they're opening, this is not good. And if you broke that down just to like our state, so Ohio, and I know you can't do that because it's not necessarily the case with the way those statistics work, but that's about 100 churches every year closing in Ohio. 100. And only 50 popping up to replace them. So we're losing 50 churches every single year for the next 25 years. Gone. Another statistic. The vast majority, I don't know if you know this, the vast majority of churches in our country are shrinking. It's actually 60 to 70% of churches are in the decline right now. That's really high. Now, there's a small number of churches growing. We're one of them. But the interesting part when you look at those graphs is not the declining or the increasing churches. It's what they call the stable church. The stable church, the church that stays the same from year to year, it's disappearing. There is almost no more churches that kind of stay the same. You're either dying or you're growing. There is no third direction now. And that's a little scary. It's a little scary, especially if you're a growing church. That means if you get comfortable and you think, oh, we'll just stay here for a while. No, you won't. The moment you let off the gas, you start going in the opposite direction. Another stat, this one's personally depressing. Only 16% of pastors are under the age of 40. Not anymore. Can you tell? Now I feel really old the moment you say that. I'm like, my gosh. But then the next stat makes me feel a lot better. So here, the average age of a pastor is 60. I'm a baby. Good. We got a long way to go. Long way to go. The average age is 60. 85% of pastors will be at retirement age in 4 years or less. 85% will be at retirement age in the next half decade. And here's the thing. So many of them could retire. A lot of them won't. A lot of them should. and they won't because they can't. Because there's no one there to replace them. And the scary part for me is I don't think that 5,000 churches closing per year takes that into account. That in the next 5 years, we're going to have a crisis of leadership in the church. I think that could accelerate things because a church without a leader can't function very well. Let me give you a couple more. The average church in America has exactly one person in their 20s. One. Is not the place to come meet people if you're single, right? You're the only one. That's not the case here, by the way, but that's average. That's what's normal out there. Is one person in their 20s. One more. 15 years ago, so 2010, if you had walked up to an 18-year-old American and asked them if they grew up in church, 40% of them would have said yes. So 40% of 18-year-olds would have been like, yeah, I grew up in church. If you do the same thing today, 15 years later, 2025, and you talk to an 18-year-old, did you grow up in church? It's only 18% of them would say yes to that. 18% of 18-year-olds grew up in church. So back up and look at everything I just told you. Stats about churches, pastors, the youth. If you look at all that, take all that together, and then you take that little thing that Jesus said, hey, here's what's going to happen. The spiritual temperature is going to get cold. I'd say he was right. It is getting cold out there. The temperature is dropping. There is a spiritual glacier settling over our culture. And it's not, you ever hear, anytime somebody rings the bell of something that's coming, it's always like, in like 30 years, this is going to be really bad. And I'm always like, well, my kids will deal with that. I'm good. But this is not, right? This is not some 30, 40 years from now thing. This is in the next 5 years. This is in the next 10 years. We're going to be dealing with a big problem when it comes to our faith in this culture. So what do we do? What do we do? I just want you to know, for me, when I read this, I actually I'm not afraid of all this. I'm not afraid of what I just told you. I have a little bit of an underdog complex. So the moment you tell me, oh, this is really bad, I'm gonna be like, good, all right, this is good for us. Now we have, we're in that place, and I think Christianity seems to work best when it's in an underdog place. And that also means when things get like this, that there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of opportunity out there, It's not a coincidence that our mission statement is to be a church for people who don't think church is for them. It sure seems like there's a whole lot more of those people now. So I look at that and I say, okay, maybe God has positioned us in a place on purpose. But here's what I want you to know. So what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? All this is not great. Faith is taking some big hits. There's this spiritual glacier kind of settling over things. I believe again, you told me you go to Mosaic. You said it, not me. We are called to heat things up. Look at 2 Timothy 1:6. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you. Fan into flames. That little ember here, that little spark that God placed inside of you, he's like, hey, get some oxygen on that. Fan into flames the thing that he's done in your soul that's going to be that mission, that calling, that purpose that he has for you. God is calling right now. Do you hear it? He wants you to fan that into flames. We're called to heat things up. We're called to start a fire here in Wadsworth. We're supposed to bring the heat. And the way this works as a church is all those little embers, all those little fires inside your soul, we're supposed to bring those together as a church, and we're supposed to find the center of whatever glacier God has called us to, and we're supposed to light that thing up. We're supposed to heat it up from the inside out. And that's what has been our mission for the past 10 years as a church, and that's what I want our mission to be for the next 30 or 40. So I just told you what's been happening in our culture. Can I tell you how God has been moving in Mosaic for the past decade? Can I do a little story time here? Tell you. So this is really important for you if you don't know our backstory. Some of you live this. So I won't go back 10, I'll go back 9 years. 2016. 2016 was a good year. So in January, I got a little timeline for you. In January of 2016, isn't that beautiful? I made it myself. Right here, we became Mosaic Church in January of 2016. Before that time, the church was called Grace and Truth Church, and that church existed for 50 or 60 years. Long history there, storied history, an interesting history. And when I became lead pastor, it was what's called a church revitalization. So you have a lot of older people, and the church isn't doing a lot. And I became lead pastor and started to transition some things. So what I wanted to do in 2016 is kind of say, hey, we're in a new season. So we're going to break with the old and we're going to start something new. So we changed our name and kind of leaned into the new season there. Now, at the time, we were meeting at a little green building over by the hospital. It's a daycare now. It's about as big as 2 double wides pushed together. And God did some stuff in that little building, man. God filled that building up We didn't have room in the parking lot, didn't have room in kids ministry, didn't have any room in the sanctuary. There were people everywhere. We actually, some of the seats that were there are here. So if you sit on like the outsides and you're wondering why your butt's hurting right now, it's because those seats are like 15 years old. We kept them. But God moved there. God moved there. So in January, we started this kind of new season as a church. Now in June, pause the timeline for a minute. It's not on the timeline. But in June of 2016, the Cavs beat the Golden State Warriors after being down 3-1 to bring the first championship to Cleveland in 52 years. Told you, it's weird you're clapping for that, but it's 2016 was a good year. Now, we became Mosaic, and then in September of 2016, we had this crazy, call it like a God dream, where we felt like what God was doing in that little building was bigger than that little building. Like the building wasn't going to be able to hold the thing that we believed God was going to do with the church. So we took a crazy leap of faith together as a church, and we actually left the building and we went and started meeting at Wadsworth High School in the Performing Arts Center. And that's where that season of the church started there. And that lasted, we met at a school for 5 years. 5 years. And it was huge. We had this expectation. We believed that God was going to do something there. We didn't know. We weren't sure. It was risky. It was costly. But we took a leap because of what we believed God could do, what God would do. Now, to close out 2016, my second-born son, Zeke, was born. And man, 2016 was an awesome year. It was an awesome year. And the Cavs are good again. I'm not having another kid. I can tell you that right now. This year will be a certain amount good, but not that good. 4 is enough. So we moved to make room for what we believed God was going to do with this church. So we moved in and out of the high school for every Sunday for 5 years. Almost 260 times, in and out, in and out, in and out. And the closest substantial storage that the school gave us was the farthest classroom from the Performing Arts Center. Literally, we measured it was like a 1/4-mile walk from the classroom all the way to the stage in the Performing Arts Center. So we had some really faithful volunteers who got their steps in every single Sunday, in and out, in and out. And here, I'll be transparent with you. It didn't do what I wanted it to. We thought, my reasoning was, this building's too small. Well, this one's bigger. Here, we'll fill this room up. And that's what I wanted to see. But it didn't. We didn't. I have some, like looking back now, some reasons. Like you went from a room that was too small to a room that was too big. And there's some problems with both. But he didn't. When you walk into the Performing Arts Center on either side, they have a little plaque on the side that says capacity 922. And every time I walk by that, I touch that little sign as a statement of faith that I believed God was going to fill this up. Here's the weird thing. My kids still have plays and stuff there. I still touch that stupid sign every time I walk by it. It's like this twitch that I have. I have half a mind to say we should go back on a Christmas or an Easter to fill it up because I think we'd do it now. We'd do it now. But how many of you know when you have a dream, like a God dream, it doesn't always turn out the way you thought it was going to? That doesn't mean God wasn't doing something. It's just like, hey, you had the timeline a little screwed up or you had the details a little messed up, but God was moving you in a direction. And he was doing some things that maybe you didn't even see. And I know that's true. So for the 5 years that we didn't have a building, God did do something. So when you don't have a front door as a church, one of the things you have to do is you have to get out into the community and make connections with people. Because as far as they are concerned, you don't exist, right? If you don't have a building, like there's nowhere, what are you going to do? So for 5 years, we were a part of every single thing that Wadsworth would do. Any First Friday, any Blue Tip, anything, we were out there, we were in it, we were hustling because we had to. Otherwise, we didn't exist, right? We were out there. And what I didn't realize during those 5 years is God was developing our outreach muscles as a church, that it was going to become intuitive. It was going to become instinctual for us. For 5 years, God trained us in that. Remember that scene in Rocky where Mickey's trying to train him to use his right hand and because he's lefty. So he ties his left hand behind his back and he's making him like jab and he looks like an idiot trying to punch a bag with his right hand. That's what God did. He's like, hey, you don't get a building. Develop these muscles. So we didn't have that advantage, and God used that time to really train us. And guys, they grew. Like we got really strong in that area as a church, like really strong. I just met with a pastor who was asking me about it. I'm like, hey, I don't know what to tell you. Go mobile for 5 years? Like nobody wants to hear that as an answer, but like that's one of the things that did it. And here's the crazy thing, I didn't even tell you guys this last year. There's this organization called Momentum Ministry Partners. A bunch of churches are attached to it. We're a part of it. And we got a box in the mail one day. I opened it up and we won Outreach Church of the Year last year for that organization. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Now, you're like, why didn't you tell us? Well, we don't do it for the awards, guys. Like that's not, it's a really cool thing to be acknowledged in that way. And for me, that's evidence. Like, look what God did during those 5 years. It wasn't what I wanted. And you need to know that sometimes your dreams, it's not going to turn out the way you thought. That's not what I thought it was going to be. But God used it anyways. And then if you've gone here for any amount of time, you know the story that in 2021, God gave us kind of a new dream together, a new God-level-sized dream where we started praying for a home. We felt like, hey, being mobile for 5 years, it's time to find somewhere to plant some roots down. So we started praying. We took beginning of 2021, we prayed and we fasted. We asked God for a home, and 3 days after that fast was over, we got the call that this building was available, and God moved. And it was like miracle level for us. He put us right here. So we moved in after 5 years. This is not to scale, by the way. Somebody else should have done that. That's 5 years. Boom, we moved in here. And man, what a thing. You realize like where we used to, I still reminisce with some of the people who were here. We used to do all our outreaches over at the gazebo. We would be out in First Fridays in the rain and in the snow. We'd be out there, even in February we were out there. We had those little heaters. We'd stand there and like, come to Mosaic. And then God gave us a building that we can still see it from the front door, where he had developed these muscles. He trained us for 5 years, put us in this building. And man, the moment we got here, it like took off. Since we moved in, it's felt like a sprint to keep up with what God has been doing. When we left the school, we were about 150, 200 people. Right after COVID, every church kind of took a big hit there. So about 150, 200 people. The moment we moved in the first year we moved in, we went from 200 to 400 people. It was just almost immediately, a huge season of growth immediately followed moving in. And then the next thing that happened is we started King Street Cafe. It was another kind of a big God dream type thing. I don't know if you know this, but the cafe next door is actually the church's. And the reason we did that, so when we moved in, there was another business there called Rise and Grind. They closed. We had a decision to make. What are we going to do? They're closing. Should we rent it to somebody else? Should we do something? So kind of got this crazy idea in mind. What if we started our own cafe? And the heart behind it was like, listen, most churches use their buildings one time a week, and then it sits closed. And we said, hey, what if we had at least a piece of this building that was used every single day? And we provided this thing that's not a church, but it's not outside of church. It's kind of this in-between place where community could be made, connections could be made, and we would be present. And maybe people who would never go to church would go there, and we would have some kind of a way, some kind of a connection with them that God could use. So one of the things that I do as a leader is I find some good people, kind of put them together and hope good things happen. So Miss Melinda's over there. She's amazing. She's a machine. She's so good at what she does. And then we put Joy over there. Joy is artistic and passionate. And Pastor Chris helps run that thing. And those three together, man, have made this thing amazing. I don't know if you know, man, the cafe is doing so well. Didn't know it was going to. I don't know how to run a coffee shop. I was just like, let's do it. And everybody else was like, okay. But now it is. Man, I used to go over there to like relax sometimes, and I can't because there's so much going on over there. God has used it in so many different ways. If you want to know some of the stories, just ask Melinda, ask Joy, some of the cool stuff that God has done over there. Oh, and by the way, also anything the cafe makes, like profit-wise, comes back over to be used for ministry here, and it's doing it. Like it's actually working. So God did that, and it was an amazing, awesome God dream that has turned out better than I could have hoped or imagined. Actually, that same year, I got in trouble for this because you're not supposed to do two big things in 1 year. We started church on Thursday. So we started a completely new church service on Thursdays. It's the same message as what you're hearing now, a little different vibe, a little different music. But the reason we did that is we wanted to We wanted to reach a different crowd of people, so we heard the statistic that 30% of the workforce works on the weekends. Doesn't matter how many times you invite them to church, they can't come because they work on the weekends. And then you guys know there's kids' sports, there's travel, there's vacation, so many things that happen on the weekends. We wanted to open up a new spot where people could come and be able to connect with God. So that saying, if you want to reach people no one's reaching, you need to do things no one else is doing. We took that to heart. And we started church on Thursdays. Around here, there's not really anybody doing that, and it's hard. It costs our staff and our volunteers quite a bit to do that. I have 3 days to come up with a sermon every week, so that's fun. I don't feel bad for me. I like it. It keeps me running fast. But that service is continuing to gain momentum. I want to throw this out there for you since you come to the 11 o'clock. This is usually our busiest service. So if you're like, man, this is annoying. The parking lot's full and I have to wait to get coffee. Not on Thursday. Not on Thursday. And I hear Jesus will love you a little bit more if you go to Thursday. Sorry. But that one is something that's really, it's working. God's moving there as well. So since we moved in, we've been in this building for 3.5 years. 3.5 years feels like forever. It's only been 3.5 years. That number right there, 90. We have baptized 90 people here. 90. That's amazing. Guys, that's more than the amount of people who went to the church when I first became pastor. That's crazy. And if I could tell you the stories of the different ways that God has moved in different people's lives. Everybody coming to God from completely different angles. Young, old, everything in between. God has been moving. And we're in another little season of growth right now, just in the beginning of this year. This year, so far, we're averaging like 650 people on a weekend. 650. In 3.5 years, we've experienced 200% growth. 200. That's nuts. Last week, we had 150 kids in kids ministry. I was just checking with Nicole. She said it's probably going to be about that again today. 70 in youth. 70 youth. Absolutely blows me away what God has done. I can't even fully articulate it. But what I want you to see is not just how awesome this is, but I wanted to contrast it. Remember in the beginning of the sermon when I was trying to depress you with all the stats about churches dying and pastors getting old? Well, look at that compared to what God is doing here. It's almost like God is working in the exact opposite way. He's doing the thing here that's not happening out there. It's getting colder out there, but warmer in here. The next generation is disappearing out there, but it's thriving here. Churches are shrinking out there, but this one is growing. It's amazing what God is doing. I'm not saying any of that. All of it doesn't come off like I'm bragging. I'm not. I'm blown away. I'm humbled by it. I can't believe it's happening. And then, so here's what happens inside of me. I know this isn't normal. This isn't normal. What we're experiencing here is not normal. So immediately I go into this mode where I'm like, man, this is like a responsibility. Like God's given us something here. A move of God is not something to be taken for granted. A move of God is not something to be taken lightly. I almost feel like we're playing football and God's the quarterback and he handed the ball to us and said, run. And I'm like, shoot, the ball. Like I want to put both hands on this thing and I want to run straight ahead and get as far down the field as possible. And what I don't want to do is fumble it. I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to get in God's way. I don't want to get behind. I don't want to screw this up. We have an opportunity. God is moving. I want to keep experiencing it. Look at Ephesians 5:15 through 17. It says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. What a crazy verse, because it's not like, hey, don't sin, don't do something evil. It's like, hey, actually, don't do something stupid, because that's not the same, right? Evil and stupid aren't the same. You can mess stuff up by doing things that aren't necessarily sinful. And then very specifically this idea of like, make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Make sure you get good and warm because it's cold out there. Don't take for granted the things that God is doing. Act with purpose, act strategically, passionately, sacrificially. We want to continue to experience God moving. Because if we don't, what happens? If we don't continue to lean into what God is doing, do we then become the statistics? That's the scary part for me. If we don't think and act strategically and sacrificially now, there will be consequences to that. Because all those things I showed you that timeline on purpose to show you, hey, we had a God dream and we took a risk, we took a step of faith. Hey, we had a God dream and we took a step of faith. Hey, we had a God dream and took a step of faith. We had to seize those opportunities. We had to take a little bit of a risk. We had to make a little bit of a sacrifice, and God honored that. And now here we are. And the same thing applies here. But can I tell you what hurts my brain a little bit? If I could go back in time 4 years exactly and talk to myself. We had just found out we were getting the building. It took us we didn't get in until October, but we knew we were getting it, and we were starting to do preparation for that. If I could go back and tell young Adam, so young, 4 years ago, in my 30s, gosh, be like, hey, listen to what God's going to do. He'd be blown away. He'd be like, what? Don't even have a frame of reference for that. We're here and God's going to do all this stuff. I said, somebody come up to me after service because I was doing this at the 9 o'clock. I'm like, we were here, now we're here. He's like, actually, it's not a straight line. It's more like a J curve. God's just continuing. The increase in speed is actually a little scary. Here's the thing that hurts my brain, though. If we were here and now we're here 4 years later, well, now we're here. What is this? What does it look like 4 years from now? That's the thing that hurts me a little bit. Because 200% growth in 4 years is nuts. What's 200% growth now? Anybody got a minute? It's 2,000 people, guys. You think parking's bad now? The whole downtown, that'd be nuts. I don't have a frame of reference for that. But I don't. If God is moving, this is not a normal thing. Guys, listen. Do you know how many churches are having the opposite conversation? I was just in one a couple weeks ago to do a funeral. There's nobody there. They have this big building. They have everything super nice, and nobody comes to it. And the conversations they're having are, what are we going to do? What we're going to do is nobody coming. Our conversations are, what are we going to do? We have too many people. Do you understand how crazy this is? This is nuts. So for us to sit here and go, all right, God is moving here. We're a part of something. We're caught up in something. I don't want to mess this up. He's taken us from here to here. What can we do to be a part of what he's going to continue to do? I don't want to mess this up. And everything that I'm saying, I hope you hear, we're not having problems. We're not having money problems. We're not having attendance problems. We're not having volunteer problems. We're not. Everything is up and to the right. This is amazing. But it's an opportunity. There's a responsibility with it. We can't just be like, isn't that nice? If God's going to bring the rain, we got to keep planting the field, right? If God's going to bring the wind, we got to raise the sail. If God's going to bring a harvest, we need to get the workers ready to reap. So what I want to do is I want to share some new God dreams with you. Opportunities that we have as a church. Opportunities to get ready for what God is going to do and is doing right now. That I think it's not that we could, it's that we need to, because it's getting cold out there. And our fire can't start to flicker. Our fire needs to burn hot, hot, hot in response to how cold it is out there. So I'll give you 3, because I'm an endless supply of them. God just keeps moving. Here's our first one. I want us to train future leaders of the church. Train future leaders of the church. If 85% of pastors are retiring in the next 4 years or could retire in the next 4 years, we need some new ones. And I want us to be a part of that solution. So here's how we're going to do it. We're piloting right now an intern program. Logan Dawson, if you know who that is, he's our first pastoral intern. And here's the way it's working for him. He's going to school at Grace College up in Akron. And he's going to get a 4-year degree. He just finished his first half semester. And he's going to get that education. We're funding that education, and he's working for it here. So we benefit by having him here while he's getting an education. So in 4 years, he's going to come out with a ministry degree with no debt. No debt. Yeah. And so he's going to have 4 years of an education and 4 years of experience in a growing church. He's going to have the book knowledge and hopefully a little bit of the street knowledge too, right? So he's not going to come out just being an egghead like, I know Bible facts. He's going to actually know how to use them, okay? That's the point. If you know anybody who just goes to Bible school, sometimes they're insufferable and horrible. We're going to try and prevent that. I wish I had this. You know, I'm 41. Last year, you know what I did? Paid off my student loans. Last year. You should clap for that. That's an amazing accomplishment. Took me 2 decades. But he's going to come out completely debt-free into ministry, which, by the way, isn't a lucrative business. And then he'll be freed up to get after it. Here's what I want to do. I want to do that on repeat. What if we didn't have 1? What if we had 5 or 10? What would that look like? How much would that help us as a church be bolstered by a bunch of young guns ready to take hell with a water pistol? You know them? They got that energy, man. How awesome would it be if we had a bunch of them here and we were doing the thing where, hey, they're going to get out of here with a 4-year degree. They're going to get out of here with tons of experience. It's good for us, it's good for them, and it's good for the kingdom of God. What if we just did that over and over and over and over and over again and answered this? We're going to go right at the problem, right at it. Let's do it. That's the first thing. The second thing, I want us to invest in our next gen. That's youth and kids specifically. So let's deal with youth first. Our youth go to camp every year. I don't know if you know that. They go to this awesome camp, and it's a life-changing experience for these kids. They spend a week where they get away from the environment. You know how important it is sometimes to get out of your environment. They get out of their environment, and they get down there, and they have these encounters with God. All these kids down there having sessions where they learn about him, where they lean into him, where God just moves, and it can be like direction altering for these kids. But it's also not super cheap. You guys know that. Camp is ridiculous. So what I'd love for us to do is start a scholarship program to send our youth there. I want a scholarship program to send our kids to have an encounter with God every summer. Because I don't want, and I bet you don't, I don't want any kid here to go, I'd love to go to that, but I can't afford it. I don't want any kid to ever feel that way. So let's make it so that that's never the case and fund that, have scholarship program so that as many of our teens that would want to go have that encounter would be able to. And then kids ministry. I told you we had 150 kids last week. That didn't include the 50 volunteers that make that happen. That's all in kids ministry, 200 people in kids ministry. Now, Miss Lauren is our kids ministry pastor, and she's doing an amazing job. But 200 people, that's a church all by itself. So our kids ministry department needs bolstered. It would make a huge impact if we had another staff member there to help her continue to lean into that, invest in that, and grow that thing, to point our kids to Jesus. We need that. By the way, parents, you're here today. If your kids are in kids ministry, your kids are a part of that 18% who will say they grew up in church. Isn't that cool? That you're a part of that little, yeah, you should. That's awesome. You're doing it. You got the torch lit. You're heating up that glacier right now just by being here right now, because they're getting something that a lot of kids aren't getting. So the next generation needs Jesus, especially as it gets colder out there. It's going to be colder for them than it is for us. We got to get them ready. And then the last thing, I want us to prepare for multiplication. I want our church to prepare for multiplication. You know that if God keeps bringing people into this space, that we will eventually run out, right? If God did what he already did, if he does what he already did, we're going to run out of room. And that's awesome. Okay. You guys ever think things are signs? I knew this was coming. I didn't know it was going to come at this time in the sermon. So if you're watching online and you can't hear, the alarm is going off in Wadsworth. So we're going to listen to see what it says, because it's probably a thunderstorm thing. Somebody already checked. Just confirm with me. It's not a tornado? All right, we're good then. Nobody cares. Okay. I was going to say, because kids ministry is about to get really crowded because we're going to go down the basement. All right, that was God getting our attention. 200% growth in 4 years would put us at 2,000 people. I have a bunch of ideas of how to solve that. I have a bunch of ideas. But we're not ready for any of them. We're not. You'd be like, well, does that mean we'd add a service? Maybe. We'd try to add another service. Does that mean we'd knock down some walls? Maybe. I don't know. Give somebody a sledgehammer, right? Does that mean we're going to plant a campus somewhere? Yeah. I definitely want to do that. Well, when does that happen? I don't know. I feel like we're like driving. I've got like one hand on the steering wheel, and God's got his hand over here, and he's the one controlling the gas pedal and the brake pedal. I don't control the speed. You wouldn't want me to anyways. That's terrible. He could hit the gas, he could hit the brake. I don't know. But you know that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, and the second best time is now? That's where we're at right now. Severe weather warning. We're good. So I should preach longer so you don't have to walk out in the rain? Is that what you guys are saying? No, that was really loud. Shut up. So we have a responsibility right now. We have a responsibility to act with strategic urgency in what God is doing. I do not want to let this pass. So you know what all these dreams take? You know what all these God dreams take? What all these opportunities take to actually seize them? Oh my gosh, shut up, man. Landing the plane here. They take resources and relationships. In order to do this, it takes resources and relationships. To train future leaders, to invest in our next generation, to prepare for multiplication, we need resources and relationships. Or to say it in a blunt way, because our church is just kind of blunt, we need money and we need volunteers to be able to keep going. We need money and we need volunteers. None of this can happen if it isn't funded. And listen, you guys know we're good at the volunteer thing. That's one of our strengths. I think that came with the outreach thing. We trained for that. But we need to get better at the money part. Cool ideas, nice dreams won't happen without financial backing. So here's what we're going to do. I want to be very upfront with you. You said to me that you go here, okay? In the beginning, if I was talking to you, you said this is your church. So this is our church. We're going to talk openly and plainly about vision and money for the next 3 weeks here. Then at the end of the series on April 6th, we're going to make a commitment together to make this happen, all right? Now I want to coach you through the mentality. Here's our mentality. Don't you dare sit there and think, oh, Adam's asking us to donate to the church. No, I'm not. Jesus did not call the church an organization, okay? This is not the Red Cross. This is not your local animal shelter. You are not donating here. Jesus called this a family. He called us brothers and sisters, and we are called to do something here. We have a part in his mission on this earth. God put us here in Wadsworth in 2025, and he did it for a reason, and he brought you here for a reason. So these opportunities are opportunities that we will consider. And I want you to be a part of it. I want to invite you into that. I don't want you to just say, oh yeah, I go here. No, I want you to be a part of what God is doing here. It won't happen if we don't do it. So for 2 weeks, we're going to talk about money, why it's important to your heart, and why it's important to the church's mission. So for some of you, you would have like if I asked the question, like, what does money have to do with God? You'd be like, I have no idea. We're going to talk about that. We're going to explain what money has to do with God and what it has to do with your heart. And then some of you, let's be honest, you have hangups when it comes to money in the church, right? You're worried about that. And just so you know, I'm not raising money for my second jet. Okay, we're not doing that here. My old one's fine. I'm good. But we're going to talk about that too. I just want to look right at it. Let's just be honest. Let's be real with each other. And at no point, if you know this, if you've gone here, I'm never going to guilt you. I don't get my guilt gun out. Go. I don't do that. So we're just going to have a plain, open conversation about what this is and what God's doing here and what we hope he's going to do and what that means for us. This is your church. This is where God has placed you. So here's what I want to challenge you on. I want you, today your challenge is to just pray. To pray about being a part of what God is doing here. Because what if this is the thing I want you to consider, what if you're that 1 degree? That one specific strategic transformative degree. What if you adding your weight behind this, you buying into this is that degree that takes us from 32 to 33 that changes everything? What if you're that one? That's an important one. So I want you to pray about that, what God wants to do with that, to be open to what he wants to do in your heart, to be open to what he wants to do in this church. And then by the way, if you weren't one of those people who said, I go to Mosaic, if you're newer here, this is your first time here, man, I hope that this has been informative for you. And I want to invite you in as well. God's doing something here. I don't think it was a coincidence that you showed up today. You should pray about what that means to you. And you don't have to jump all the way in right now. I understand that we need a minute. But I think that means something. All right, stand up. Pray with me. Lord, I thank you for what you're doing here. I pray that we would feel the weight of that it's amazing, and that it's a responsibility as well. I pray for every person in this room, Lord, that you would help them feel caught up in something bigger than themselves and drawn to that. Help this church not fumble that ball you've handed us. I want to mess it up, Lord. Help us seize the opportunities you've placed before us. Help us light this glacier up and do that thing you've called us to do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.